Well, this week, Anthony Albanese secured a meeting with the US President Donald Trump, and that will happen on October 20. The question now is, how does Prime Minister Anthony Albanese approach that meeting, avoid a situation in the Oval Office such as the one experienced by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky? Joining me live is the former Home Affairs Secretary, Mike Pezzullo. Mike, thanks so much for your time. Trump's got a certain style about him. He is accused of being transactional. I mean, he even said at the UN he only does business with people that he likes. So he's got this, personable approach about him as well. What do you think? What would your advice be to Anthony Albanese?
Good morning, Laura. It struck me in the commentary in lead up to the meeting, and obviously the commentary prior to that about whether or not the meeting was going to occur, but now it's occurring. What struck me in the commentary is that a lot of the opinions and voices out there, if I can respectfully say this, are typically people who have not done business with Donald Trump. I certainly didn't, but as Secretary of my department, I dealt with people who were literally one or two steps removed from the President in the first term. And I can say to you quite resolutely, Laura, he works on trust. He's actually quite a relational leader rather than a transactional leader. He builds relationships, he builds situations of trust. You might not agree with his decisions, but he works through networks that he trusts very deeply. It struck me as just as a little vignette that demonstrates that point, that rather odd and indeed quite peculiar vision that we saw during the week, Laura, of the President of France being stuck at a barricade because his motorcade was coming through, and a New York policeman, one of New York's finest, was saying to the President, "I'm really sorry, Mr. President, I know who you are, but you can't cross." He rang him. So he obviously, Mr. Trump is in his phone. Emmanuel Macron is in Trump's phone. He answered the phone. It was subsequently confirmed by the French Foreign Ministry and the President's office that indeed it was a real discussion. Now, Donald Trump, if you take the caricature of him, people would think he would have a lot of gripes with Emmanuel Macron. Macron has from day one been resolute in supporting Zelensky and Ukraine, including at a time when Donald Trump wasn't. He's changed now. He's been he's been driving hard on Gaza and the West Bank with Saudi Arabia. There's been this joint initiative which has been about mobilising recognition. If you take the sort of dumbed down view of Donald Trump, or the caricature of Donald Trump, he wouldn't speak to him at all. And yet he answers the phone. They have quite a jocular conversation, it would seem, about I'm stuck on the street. And then they have according to the vision, they had a quick discussion about we need to catch up on that Gaza matter. You need to be in his phone. So that to me, Laura, means that the outcome of the meeting is not we've done the meeting, we now move on, we get that monkey off our back. Journalists back in Australia won't ask me about the pesky issue of a Trump meeting. That's actually got to be the first meeting of a 2 or 3 year long relationship for the balance of the Trump term of close and intimate discussions about particularly security issues in Asia.
I mean, also Anthony Albanese's got to remind Trump some way without being too forthcoming that he's a winner, and because Trump likes winners as well. Anthony Albanese spent this trip talking about recognition of Palestine and climate change a lot. And there are two big points that he disagrees, or him and Trump disagree in a policy sense. Would you say avoid those altogether and talk about what is in both of our interests, and that is China?
Oh, look, I think, as you've seen with Keir Starmer, you've seen it with Emmanuel Macron, you've seen it with other leaders, particularly from Europe, there is no point just having a headbutt on issues that you're not going to agree upon. Trump's got a view, he'll still engage with you, but he's got a view that France, the UK, Australia and others are wrong on Palestine. Trying to waste valuable time in a meeting to try to change his mind on that is frankly a misuse of time, as would be advancing an argument around green technology and energy renewables. Trump's not going to shift on those issues. Where we do need to have some common ground in this relational sense that I've suggested is the big question, in fact, the most consequential question, I think, an Australian Prime Minister, whoever was in the job, we are now entering, regrettably and tragically, Laura, a possible window of war. Over the next 2 years, between now and the end of 2027, when the next Communist Party National Congress is scheduled in about 2 years' time, these are the only consequential questions that really matter for Australian interests. One, will Xi Jinping decide that peaceful means to resolve what he has grievances about in relation to Taiwan, East China Sea or South China Sea? He's done with peaceful approaches. He's going to use military force. Then the consequential question for Australia then becomes, what will the United States do? Because if the United States decide to both deter that military force but ultimately seek to constrain it, but ultimately, potentially, seek to engage in battle with Chinese forces in order to preclude them from achieving their goals, there's only two people who can really have that conversation between the US and Australia, the President and the Prime Minister. You won't resolve it on the 20th of October, but I'd be strongly urging the Prime Minister to have as quiet a conversation as possible. I wouldn't make anything publicly known about this. Mr. President, what's your current thinking on the prospect of conflict in the Pacific? Because where you go on that will determine, not absolutely, but largely condition Australian policy. Because you'll expect me to support you, I need to have an insight into your thinking. And Laura, I don't think that Trump's made a final decision about whether he would use force to counter Xi. It's a year or two off, but we need to start having that discussion now. And respectfully, in relation to those other issues, because they are very important issues, that issue dwarfs all the other issues that we've been talking about this week, the UN multilateral system, Gaza and climate action. If there's a war in the Pacific, that tragedy will dwarf and overwhelm all of those other issues.
I thought it a really interesting comment today where Donald Trump was asked about the West Bank, and he, in his first kind of public rebuke of Netanyahu, or at least the first for a while, he said, we're not going to let Israel do that. No way. No annexation. It's time to end the war in Gaza. What did you make of that?
Well, it goes back to the relational point. Obviously, he's got a deep relationship with the Prime Minister of Israel, no question, but it doesn't mean that the Prime Minister of Israel gets carte blanche, particularly in terms of what his government sees as the annexation of what they call Judea and Samaria, which are large parts of the West Bank. Clearly, Mr. Trump is listening to and speaking to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the President of France, including on that sidewalk discussion in New York the other night, and he can be influenced, but by people who've got a stake in the game. I want to be respectful of our own agency here. I just don't think Australia's got much to contribute to that issue, whereas countries, the EU, France, Saudi Arabia, the Arab and Muslim countries that met overnight, they are critically important, and they're obviously influencing his thinking. And going back to the point about trust, where he's built relationships of trust with people, obviously that's influencing his thinking. He knows that annexation would lead not just to a wrecking of the prospects for peace in Gaza and the West Bank, but potentially could lead to a wider conflict in the Middle East.
Something else,
and he knows that.
Yeah, something else curious I saw this morning is that Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, has ordered a rare urgent meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals, but we don't know why. Why do you think?
Look, it was odd. It was reported in the Washington Post. It seems quite well sourced. It's highly unusual, quite apart from anything else from a security point of view. You don't want to necessarily have your entire military leadership literally in one room. That could present challenges. I'm sure they'll lock it down and secure it. There's a couple of things happening, Laura. It's hard to read because the article, the Washington Post report, did not speak to a motive or an agenda. That no doubt will become clear in the next couple of days. Look, it could be about announcing their new national defence strategy. We've spoken before about the role of Elbridge Colby. One of the things he's doing, apart from the AUKUS review, is working on a new national defence strategy. It might be that the Secretary has decided that he's going to brief that to his military leadership, generals and admirals, in a room together to lay down the priorities of the Trump administration in terms of national defence. I suspect, given what Secretary Hegseth has been saying, they will double down on what's called hemispheric defence, so the ability to protect the United States and its immediate approaches, and the ability to deter and, if necessary, match China, potentially in a conflict. That, if it's that'll be hugely consequential. It could be other things. He's also talked about reducing the number of admirals and generals by variously 10 to 20% in different classifications. Maybe he's going to announce to them what that reduction plan looks like in terms of people who are going to be losing their jobs potentially. And the other thing that we haven't been tracking too closely here in Australia, as far as I can tell, is the potential for a shutdown of US government operations next week. In fact, their fiscal year terminates at midnight on the 30th of September. Their new year starts on the 1st of October. There is some talk about the potential for a shutdown if last-minute appropriations deals can't be brokered in the Senate and the House. So maybe there's something happening around there. It is odd, but it could be anyone or indeed anything else on a list of potential convening issues or agenda items.
Well, if we're going to speculate, Mike, you're the best man to do it. So thank you for doing that with me this morning. I'm sure we will soon find out. Mike Pezzullo there. Thanks so much.